Good evening. How is everyone doing? Woohoo! Welcome to the Angular Mountain View meetup. My name is Stephen Fluin. I'm a developer advocate on the Angular team and your host for the night. So we have a couple awesome speakers. But before we get to that, I just wanted to do a few announcements and a little bit of an update about Angular. So we had a bunch of big announcements over the last couple weeks. Who's heard anything about Angular in the last 2 weeks? So throw something out. Tell me what's happened. ngconf, CLI release, version 4. Yes, these are all really exciting things, or at least I'm excited about them. And kind of I hope that you guys are too, in the way that we're not breaking you, but making Angular better and your bundles smaller. So this is a trend that we've been trying really hard over the last 6 months to establish, and it's something we really want to continue. So as people said, we had about 3 weeks ago for my birthday, we had a big release of version 4. And I don't know if anyone attended the launch event for version 2. That was actually Jules's birthday. So we're alternating every other version, her birthday and my birthday. It's not planned that way, but I kind of like it. It feels like a birthday cake, but better. She got balloons. 2 was a big deal, right? We were coming from a place where we were alpha, then beta, then RC. There's a lot of transition, a lot of change going on. But as soon as we hit 2, everything kind of hit a stability curve here. And we were talking about, hey, should we do any sort of celebration for 4 or a big meetup? And we said no, because 4 is not a big deal, right? It is just Angular. The version number is going to keep changing. The platform is going to keep getting better and evolving with you as developers. But we don't need to make these big kind of marks about the release numbers, because in a few years, we're going to be on Angular version 20, and it's going to be okay, right? You will still have components, I think.
You hope.
I hope. And what if we don't have components? We'll have had a very, very smooth transition with some automated tools that automatically refactor your code. So I personally feel really good about where we're going, and I think the whole team does as well. So, I mean, when we're looking at the next 6 months, I'll just do a little tiny blurb on kind of where we're headed, because a lot of people ask me. And we've really got 3 things that we're focused on: smaller, faster, easier to use. And so we want your application bundles to be smaller, which will also make your application faster. And there's some more things we can do to make it bootstrap and do change detection faster. And then easier to use, because we have a lot of experimental things. We've got a lot of cool ideas floating around on the team, but in a lot of things cool things that people are building with Angular, we want to make all of those processes easier. And so this is kind of a mandate that we're talking to every team member about, saying, hey, how are you going to make Angular smaller, faster, and easier to use? And so hopefully the demos that we're going to see tonight are going to kind of reinforce that. So we're in a new space. Hopefully everyone found it okay. We sent Hans to go look and see if anyone accidentally went to the old room. Did everybody find it okay? Awesome. So this is actually the building where the Angular team meets, or where we sit. So we're actually right upstairs. Unfortunately, I can't give you a tour, but this is as close as you can get at a tech talk, because when it's very convenient for us. So when more of the team is around, I'm sure they'll come down and say hello. So without further ado, we've got 2 speakers tonight. So I want to introduce our first speaker, who is a developer advocate at Progress, Sebastian Witalec.
Well done, man. Thank you. All right. I'm actually quite impressed with how you pronounce my name, because a lot of people struggle. But yeah, I want to talk to you today a little bit about NativeScript and my passion of building apps for robots, which is quite cool. So if any of you is on Twitter, you can follow me. I'm Seba Vita. So let me get you straight on the subject. What's NativeScript? So it's a framework that allows you to build mobile applications for iOS and Android, and you can use either JavaScript or Angular. And out of that, you get an application that gives you native performance and a native UI. And the whole framework is open source, which is pretty cool. So we kind of like released the first version like May 2015, 16. I'm getting lost now. 2015, and that was as well pretty much when Angular version 2 was coming up, and we pretty much like we talked between the Angular team and what we had, and we kind of got to an agreement that maybe we could work together to kind of like use Angular 2 for building mobile applications with NativeScript. So pretty much straight away, Tobias Bosch on the Angular team and Christo Deshev on our team, they were meeting every Tuesday and pretty much they were planning their mobile world domination with NativeScript and Angular, right? And the whole thing was like, and this is a screenshot from the very first meeting that we had, which is just like an overview that explains the platform agnostic architecture of Angular. And this was like the thing for us, where if we follow the same architecture, we can just add the NativeScript renderer that can, that knows how to display something natively on Android or iOS, but then keep the Angular architecture and the language that kind of everything that runs inside to control the app. So the whole idea was like, okay, so we can use what we already built, but enable Angular developers to build those mobile applications, right? So here's one of the examples where we had to do like this a typical to-do MVC, proof of concept. And we wanted to create it with Angular and NativeScript, but we didn't have a checkbox. So what we had to do is basically create a component. So we created a component that was displaying an image, and then we added a checkbox class with an output for tap event, and then input for a checked property. And then whenever somebody actually tapped on the image, we were just switching them between like checked or unchecked. But as well, we were sending the tap, we were sending an event to the tap event emitter. And by creating a checkbox like this, you could literally just use it like any other Angular components. So we had a checkbox, we bound the check to do completed, and then on tap event to toggle completion. And so this is like nothing new for you guys. And this was always our idea, right? Like if you sit down and start coding, it should feel familiar and very easy to use. So what gives you, what does NativeScript give to you? So one of the first thing is, because you get native UI, you get the whole native animations, page transitions, pretty much everything that you would want out of the user experience of a mobile application. Then as well, maximum skill reusability, right? So if you already know how to deal with HTML, with CSS, if you know how to create components, event binding, or pretty much anything, you can reuse all those skills. And then finally, the way we build it, actually, Angular is a first-class citizen in NativeScript, right? So again, like the way the whole of it is written, there's no like surprises. It's not like, oh, everything works like Angular here, but for these 5 things, we're gonna do something completely different. No, we actually use the whole syntax of it. And then as a result of that, you can pretty much, by combining the two, you could use NativeScript to build Android and iOS applications, but then Angular by itself gives you the web. So you could even go as far as even having a single project that allows you to share the code. So all your services, all your components could be exactly the same code. The only difference would be what goes into the HTML, right? But that's a completely different talk. And then final bit that we give you is direct access to the native API, which is a really cool thing. So if there is a function that exists in the native Android or iOS API, you could actually call it directly with JavaScript, right? And we as well, like we have this thing called a metadata builder that if, let's say, there's a new version of Xcode coming out today, and let's say Apple added teleport functionality to the device, all you have to do is download the 3 gigs of Xcode, rebuild the application. You can write the few lines of code that does the teleport, and the phone would appear over there. I mean, if the functionality exists. But literally, you could write these few lines of code in JavaScript, which is very, 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 very cool. And you don't have to wait for us to do it. And then finally, pretty much all our code that you write, all JavaScript, stays as JavaScript, and it gets interpreted at runtime. So we use Google's V8 for Android, and JavaScript core, for iOS. Sorry, I'm like, it's what, 4 a.m. for me, so I'll be getting tangled a few times. Anyway, and you as well can use CSS to style your application, which is quite cool. There's just one caveat. We don't support every single property that exists in CSS, and that is because we had to implement every single CSS property so that it would do something on Android or iOS, right? So the list is somewhat limited, but it's still, you can do quite a lot with that. And I've been saying how you could just very naturally use Angular to build your applications. But the thing is that the web UI and the mobile UI, they're not exactly the same. So what you put in HTML will be different, right? There's no such thing as div inside a mobile application. What you have to do instead, you use like stuff like absolute layout, doc layout, grid layout. We actually added flexbox layout as well. So you have to use those. So that's pretty much kind of an introduction to NativeScript. Then I'll have a couple of slides on building applications for robots. So that's me, Push, as my friend. He travels with me all around. And this is actually a picture from Airbus Museum in Toulouse when I went to speak at the local event, which is pretty cool. So the way you talk to those robots, you use obviously Bluetooth. And I don't know how many of you knows how the whole Bluetooth communication works, but the idea is pretty much all the functionality for all those devices is divided into a bunch of services. So let's say you'd have a dashboard or a weapon service or drive control service, right? And then each of those services is then divided into a bunch of characteristics. So for dashboard, you have a speed indicator and fuel indicator, right? For weapons, you would have like cute ray or laser. And then for drive control, we would have like steering wheel, accelerator, brakes. These are like examples of characteristics. And there's one thing, like each of those services and characteristics would have a UUID that basically allows you to find a specific service and characteristic. So once you have a service and characteristics, you can start writing instructions to that specific characteristic. So if you wanted, let's say, reload, maybe the command would be, let's say, 0x02, because that would be the name of the command. And then if you want to charge 50%, we'll pass in 0x32, which is 50. And then maybe the rate at like the maximum power, right? And then by constructing something like this, we'll choose like, okay, here's the service characteristic and the instruction that we pass in there. And that would basically perform something, right? You probably perform the reload functionality, right? Okay, so in order to use Bluetooth with NativeScript, you kind of have to go through a few steps. So we have to add the NativeScript Bluetooth NPM plugin. And then once you have that, we have to request permissions, execute a scan. So scan will basically search for all the devices in the area. Then once we found one we are interested in, we have to connect to it. And then once we connected, we could start either reading or writing from the characteristics. And that's pretty much the magic. So I'll show you now a bit of code, how the whole thing works. So yeah, it's probably a good idea. Is this better? Oh, this one.
Yeah, and then maybe bigger.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Can you guys see? Should I make it bigger? I can make it bigger.
Yeah, a little bit bigger.
All right. No more. All right, cool. So what I'm gonna do, am I running it already? So from the command line, I'm just gonna run tns run iOS, and I'm just gonna let it be. So what that does is basically it builds the application and then deploys it to a connected device. In my case, it is a simulator that I'm using over here. So that's gonna take a moment. Then once that's done, I don't have to rerun the command. I just have this thing called live sync, so I can start making changes like at 3 exclamation marks, and that changes very quickly. And since you can't see what I have on the screen, we already have like a pre-built style, so maybe I can make it slightly bigger, and then center the text. So I can save that, and then now you can see hello world. I can as well these are the standard things you would do with Angular, right? So I have in my class a message property, which basically says hello MTV, right? So you could do this kind of stuff. So I'll show you a few things you can do. Let's imagine we have a Boolean called all good. I don't have to say it's Boolean. I'll just say true. Type. And then let's add a function called, I don't know, do something. Right. And then inside this function, what we're gonna do is just take all good and then switch to the opposite. These are good. So come back here. I mentioned that you can use CSS. So I have this class called warning, which just sets the color to orange red. So what I can do is to add like a conditional styling. Okay, so I can do class warning when all good is false. Okay, and now I'm gonna as well add a button. NS button, and then let's say do something, and I'm gonna just call do something. If I spelled everything correctly, well, you have a button, and then we can kind of switch between styles, which is quite cool. You can also do like animations. So what we can have is, for example, I can have a bunch of keyframes. So I can say I want to start by scaling to the 50% of the size, then I want to make it a bit bigger, and then at the end I want to put it back to the normal size. So I called it this keyframe the zoom. So I'm adding to my warning and say warning class, say I want to run zoom over 2 seconds. So now if I press do something, go out, kind of like you have the zoom in and zoom out effect. And this is really cool because basically all those animations, they run natively using the GPU of your device. So you can perform actually quite a lot of things. So you can rotate things, you can make them fade in, fade out, do all sort of things, which gives this user experience to the users like that they want to come back and keep using the application. And since I'm a lazy person, I actually downloaded a bunch of animations from this guy called Danden that he published like Angular animations, and then I can just start using them. So you have like the rubber band effect, or there's like a bouncing from the left. And then I have another one I'm using, so you have like a bounce from the top. And if I come back to rubber band, I can do one more thing until I go back to more serious examples. This is my favorite one. They all kind of go a bit weird and crazy. So this is some of the things. Another thing that we can do is like, since we have like all the native UI, etc., there's this one of the components, a color picker. So what I can do, am I in the right place? Yep. What I'm gonna do is like already install the module, but I'm gonna import the NativeScript color picker, and then inside my actual component, I'm gonna add a bit of code. Obviously, you don't want to see me type everything, but what I have here is basically I'm creating an instance of a color picker as well. I have an instance of selected color that to begin with is just set to gray, and then I have a function that basically says it calls the color picker, so it pops up and then allows the user to pick a value, and once we pick the value, we just update the selected color. So what I'm gonna do now is just do something to call show color picker. Let me get rid of those. There's a bit too many of them, but you can already see the kind of performs, and then it pops up like a native component. So what I could do, for example, now is set background color to selected color. Refresh. So it's now kind of gray and ugly. You can change it and it's like pink, etc. And the cool thing is like, so this is a native color picker on iOS. If I build the same application Android, I'll get an equivalent for Android. And there's a whole bunch of those components that you can use all around. And then now that the second part I want to show you is I have like a whole routing already set up in here. So I have like a meet page and a controller for my robot. So that's where I'll be showing. So what I can do is like we can actually navigate to another page. So navigation is very, very similar. So come here. Let me add another one. Go to robot. And then we could just use NS router link. And then I can pass in a route for the MIP. That should very right. Yep. It just took a while to reload. And basically clicking on it, I kind of navigate to another page. And then you could do like all sort of different things as well. Like, so you can add different page transitions, right? So I think I already have a whole bunch of them. So if I add things like page transition curl or page transition fade or like different types of transitions, I'll show you like you can kind of have different effects. So this one is the fade one. You can have one that slides from the top, or you have another one that flips. So this kind of like is just one property, but you already get the UX of the native device, which is pretty amazing. So, but what I'm gonna do now is like, rather than navigating every time, I'm just gonna change the default path so that we work with the one with the MIP. Cool. So since I promised to you before that I'll show you how to build mobile applications for robots, I'll take you step by step what is needed in order for that to happen. So I already created like the UI that has like a get permissions function. There's a scan button, and then like a few arrows that kind of allow me to control the device. Except actually those should be on another screen, but that doesn't matter. So what I first had to do is import a Bluetooth component, and then using Bluetooth. So if we need to set permissions to allow us to use Bluetooth on the device, I basically just have to do Bluetooth dot what is it? Request course location permissions, and that will basically do a pop-up on the device asking for permission. So there's one thing: you cannot use Bluetooth with simulators. So what I need to do is switch to my phone. So I'll show you like all the step by step how it looks like on actual my phone, which would probably be better. So just bear with me for a moment, and should be able to share the screen anytime now. Perfect. So this time what I'm gonna do is just say TNS run Android, and the same project is just gonna build and be deployed directly to my phone. Okay. So exactly the same code, pretty much no differences, and then it works on both of them. So I'm already doing the get permissions. We're gonna get back to that. If you wanna scan, oh, actually that's coming up, so I can probably show you. Prepare the robot as well. Yeah, I'll make him do push-ups because why not? So you see now if I press get permissions, let me see. Oh, I already built this up on this phone, so it doesn't really ask for it. But the idea would be like there would be a pop-up if I just installed it asking for it. Anyway, so if you want to scan for available devices around, again we use Bluetooth and we call scan, and we just say start scanning, and then in here we have a whole object. So we have to provide things like seconds. So let's say we want to scan for 3 seconds. And then the second thing we have to provide is the undiscovered function. And this is why I love TypeScript as well. It's like I could just do control space and say, hey, what is the property that I need? So this would give me like a peripheral object. And then basically what happens is like if there's 5 devices in a room, when I scan, basically this undiscovered will be triggered 5 times. And the peripheral pretty much contains things like the name of the device, UUID, and a lot of other information. But I'm literally just interested in those. So let me just make this a peripheral so that we know what we're doing. And what I can do now is I have this add device function, which will add the devices to the list view. So this thing here is a list view. So if we have more than one device, we can display them there. So for every device, what I'll probably do is say if peripheral name, because sometimes the name is not there, but if the device has a name, then what we're gonna do is just call a device with peripherals. What we need, name and UUID. So that should be enough already. So I've got 2 robots. So we should be able, after scanning, see both of them. So reload the application, scan. Yeah, you see there's loads of devices in the room. But yeah, if we found the black MIP, that's something I didn't think through because my other buttons are at the bottom. Doesn't matter. So now once we found one of the devices, we have to connect to them, right? So what we can do is, if I click on one of them, it actually prints out the UUID of the device we want. So what we should probably do, let me just quickly check. So I have like another class, which is a controller. And the controller basically, we will take the UUID of the device and we will send the instructions like move forward, turn left, turn right, etc. Right? But before we send it, we have to connect. So let's do this thing. Bluetooth.connect. And then again, what do we need in order to connect? We need to pass in the UUID of the device. So let's pass in the UUID. Next thing, we need the onConnected function. So onConnected as well, like requires gives us a peripheral. So we could do this, and we'll have the onDisconnected function as well. So from here, like once we connect it, what we can do is basically, I'm gonna use the router. So we're just gonna do this router navigate, and let me check. This is why I love Angular. Like you don't have to remember everything. You can just figure out from the path what you're supposed to pass. So I'm supposed to pass MIP controller and the UUID. So, oh, I actually have a function that does that already. All right, let's do it here. Save that. Can as well add an alert saying connected. So we know that. We're almost there now. So then the last thing will be basically send a couple of instructions and the robot will start moving. So let's do a scan again. Should find 5 million devices in the area. All right, find me black. Then once connected, we got navigated to another page, right? Which displays already the buttons we want to add stuff to actually control the device. Okay, so last part, the MIP controller. So you remember at the beginning I mentioned to you that we have this thing, service UID and characteristic UID. Like I work with this guy, like wrote thousands of applications by now probably. The service UID we're interested in is FFE5 and the characteristic is FFE9. That's the one where he expects to receive instructions to move around, okay? What I'm doing is like when we navigate, I'm getting a snapshot and getting the UID of the device. So that's when how I assign the device UID. So now in order to make the robot move forward, I just have to use Bluetooth again, and then I call write without response so that we don't have to wait for it to do anything. And then here we have to pass in the service UUID. So let's pass service UID. We have to pass the characteristic UID. So let's pass the characteristic UID. What else? We have the peripheral UUID. So we're going to pass device UUID because that's easier to pronounce. And then finally is the value. So the value is where we pass the exact instruction. So where do we get the value? So for the robot, it's this particular robot, and the guys from Huawei, they were nice enough and they provide a whole documentation. So if we want to make the robot drive forward, the instruction is 0x71, and it requires 2 additional parameters. So one is for speed, and another one is for how long it's supposed to drive, right? So it's like multiplied by 7 milliseconds. So what I can do pretty much here is just say 0x71, 0x20, and 0x40, 0x20, and 0x40. So, and this is pretty much all we need to send like a single instruction. So now that we reload it, he always gets excited when he gets disconnected. So relax. If you're gonna fall, don't worry. I'll buy you new packets of batteries. You deserve it. Scanning. All right. Connect it. Should get navigate to another page and then move forward. There you go. He moved. He's a brave guy, right? He's good with fighting with squirrels as well. There you go. So now, like the rest is pretty easy stuff, right? Like, so this is how you write to go forward. So I'm just gonna copy and paste the same code for forward, backwards, left, right, and then just, so that's 72. So for moving back is 0x72. For turning left is 73 command. And then it's 74 for turning right. So finally, I'll put him down. Yes, yes, you're free for a moment. Don't get too excited. All right, connecting again. And now I can kind of like control him, make him turn around, go back, go forward. Pretty cool, right? So this is like how you do the application just like in a moment. Like obviously I wrote another app that is slightly, not this one, slightly more advanced. Actually, let me kill the app I was just building. All right. Let's see again if you can connect to. So like with this app, I can actually use accelerometer. So that's another feature, or I can like use joysticks, etc. So with accelerometer, I can control him by just tilting my phone. Go back, turn right, which is quite cool. And as well, like while he's going around, I can make him talk. So just like go to Steven and say, and then sing as a song or something. And what do you do after you had a dinner? That's what he does. He's a funny guy. So like you can do a lot of really cool stuff if you want to, connect to robots and stuff. And it's actually NativeScript as well is like not the only way that you could use Angular to build application to control devices. So I also created another application. This time I was using web Bluetooth. So I'll just demonstrate you like how the application works. But if you want to see the code, I'll point you to the link. So this is again built with Angular using web Bluetooth. So I'm just searching for the parrot. So web Bluetooth responded with one device, and I'm just connecting to it. And when it's ready, so I use like this, like all of the keys that we can use for the device. So if I press T, that's for takeoff. And I can fly around. Anyone brave enough to get shot by him? Steven, can I shoot at you? Oh, got him, yes. And then, yeah, I can go quite crazy with him. He can go like 20 meters up. So I was flying him like in my local park, like, oh, that was intentional. Oh, hey, oh well. I've got 3 of them. It's okay. Yeah. So let me just wrap up. And I already, like, if you follow me on Twitter, I already pushed my presentation there, so you can grab it from there. So just last few slides. If you want to learn more and learn about using NativeScript with Angular, we have a very nice tutorial over there. There is a project I mentioned that if you want to do code sharing between NativeScript and web with using Angular version 4 now, you could have a look at this project. And then my robot project, you could just search for NativeScript MIP BLE. That would be quite good. I should have added this slide for the drone, because that is, oh, my screen froze here. Interesting. Anyway, we'll probably come back to that. That's weird. All right, cool. Doesn't matter. I'll show you like later. If you're interested in NativeScript, like we have quite a nice community. So you can go to Slack channel, just search for a NativeScript community. There's like 3,500 people there right now. You can follow us on Twitter. And yeah, that'll be pretty much me. Thank you.
Well, that was pretty.
So if you go to npm.js and search for Mambo Angular service, that's the one with the drone. That's it. Thanks.
So, well, a big thank you again to Sebastian. This is really awesome.
Thanks.
So our next presenter, Justin Schwarzenberger, or Schwarty, as many of you may know him. He's a developer at a company called SoCreate. He and several members of their team drove up today and spent the day with us, chatting about how they use Angular, some of the cool new things that they're hoping to see from the platform, as well as getting some of their bundle size down. A big passion of mine is helping developers make smaller bundles. So they're here today to talk about a tool that they developed internally and that they've actually been able to open source called Playground for Angular. And so why don't we all give Shorty a big round of applause here.
All right, going to talk about Playground for Angular and how to build components in isolation with it. Not only components, but directives and pipes too. So as Stephen mentioned, I'm Justin Schwarzenberger, lead engineer at SoCreate. Probably didn't need to show the slide now because you did it all. Well, maybe not all of it. So I'm at Schwarty on Twitter. I'm also the host of Angular Air, a weekly video cast on all things Angular. I'm a speaker. I spoke at NGConf for the past 2 years. This year I spoke on embracing component tranquility and understanding the costs that we pay for building with components and then making smart architecture decisions around that. I'm also going to be talking at NG Cruise on templates and template-driven forms and reactive forms and kind of the difference between each and when we might want to use one or the other, that sort of thing. Also a course author for have some courses on Pluralsight and lynda.com. So that's the rundown on me. Before we dive into Playground for Angular, let's talk a little bit about components. Why components are cool, right? Components are cool because they give us this encapsulation. We can build these components and encapsulate our logic and our styles, templates, that sort of thing, and bundle them up into this nice chunk of stuff. And that allows us to have this reusability, right? We can reuse that chunk. We can make use of decorators for inputs and outputs to feed data into it, wire up actions back out of them, and then use them throughout our application. So that's kind of why components are cool, but components are also challenging, right? We've got this whole component tree. Everything in our Angular application is a component tree, starts with a component, right? We bootstrap a component, and then we just build out this tree from there. And that kind of leads to some relationships between our components, leaf nodes, and all these sort of things. We start making decisions around that because we have to work within that scope, right? And this kind of leads to coupling. We end up coupling. We have parent components that load up some data. We have children components that display that data. We have services that we put throughout there. We just kind of get in this scenario where we have this coupling, right? So that's part of the challenge with components. Now, we're all kind of in this world, we're all component architects. We have to kind of understand how to build with components, how to lay these things out. So we face kind of this workflow that we run into, right? So we need to spin up the entire app when we're working with our Angular app. We have to nav to the screen that displays our component. So as we're building these components out, we need to go through this process. And then we also kind of need to know the component that we're building, can we reuse it? Are we planning to use it just in this one screen that we navigated to? Or are we going to use it in other places? That sort of thing. So this is kind of some of the things that we face as we build out with components. And so we kind of want to make that easier, right? We want to kind of address some of those things. So first thing we need to do is identify what we kind of go through when we build with these things. So let's say we're building a new component and we want to use that in our application. Well, we want to see how that runs in the browser, right? So we've got to kind of plan where we're going to put this component. Are we going to render it? Are we ready to render it within another component somewhere in our application inside of some tool, right? Then we got to plan, like, how are we going to get there? Do we already have things like navigation, and do we already have that screen built to serve that component up? And then we got to boot it up in the browser, right? Do the bootstrap of our Angular application, have it running in the browser. And then as we make changes, we're changing HTML, CSS, that sort of thing, maybe making these micro changes, right? We're adding another container, or we're changing some CSS property, and we want the browser to reload. Well, we've got to incur the reload cost, the whole bootstrap reload of our application. And if we have a ton of components and our application's gotten really big, then we might be waiting for that. So these steps that we go through to work these components while they're in our browser is kind of becomes challenging, right? So what we really need is a way to work components in isolation outside of the scope of our application. So we say, look, we're building a new address component and we know it's going to be within this view, but we want to just start working that address component. We want to start making the markup and the logic and all those things, but we don't want to have to go through all that dance to just get it on the screen. So that's where Playground for Angular came in. So let's talk about how it came to be. We originally were building this application on Angular.js. And during that time, we had this, it's kind of like a customer management system, full customer order management, lots of screens, lots of depth, lots of data that's going on. And we kind of identified we needed this way to work like a single component in this scenario. So we came up with this sandbox idea where we would have this file that we would create that we could run with a bootstrap and not check that into our repository, and you could just kind of freely change that. So you come in, you're ready to work that new address component, you just edit this one file, change it, kind of run this thing in isolation. As people started doing that, it became a real pain that, like, you're changing the one file, right? And you're like, okay, and then I kind of want to save that. I made this address component, I set some data into it. I'm going to have to come back and refactor that component later. So I would like to keep it around. And people started just storing these files in a folder and that sort of thing. So we're like, well, really kind of need this sandbox app to support storing these scenarios over time and really kind of having them for multiple components, that sort of thing. So we built this Playground for Angular, and it's kind of like if you've ever seen React Storybook, it's similar to that. It's the same sort of concept that you can like kind of mock up how you want to run these components in these different scenarios, and then save that around and then surface that and get to that. So what it is it's like a drop-in module. So what we end up needing to do with this thing is we need to have a way to serve these components in isolation for you, but they need to be your components running through your build system. So we essentially couldn't really build a Playground as a application that runs, that serves up, that does its own running of Angular, because it needs to have things like maybe your components, maybe you're using like SAS or less or something, other things that your build system needs. Playground would have to have all those things in it if it was serving it up by itself. So we really ended up making it as this entry module that you would bootstrap aside from your app. So let's say you have a main TS file for your application, you make another main.playground.ts, and in that you bootstrap playground module instead of your app module, and then it can surface all these things and kind of do those sort of things. And so we have a site that we made for it, angularplayground.it. It's our documentation site. So we have a description of all the setup and sort of things. There's a little bit of setup, not too much, but a little bit. That talks about how you can do that. Talks a little bit about how you can start using it and why we kind of built it. Links to the repository. Again, it's open source, so it's up on GitHub. So you can kind of get information there. So that's kind of the backstory. That's it. Let's just jump right in and start doing some coding here and create some stuff in the playground. So let's see. I am in our, let's see, I'll slide over here. This is the repo for Angular Playground, or Playground for Angular. We've got a couple different example projects in here. We run with the CLI for our applications, and we kind of decided that we wanted to use the CLI early on. So we've kind of gone through the growing pains of it, now to the stability of it. So as we built this Playground app, we wanted to make sure that it supported and played nice and with the CLI. But it can work with something if you have your own build system with Webpack, that sort of thing. Basically, the concept is that you're going to be building these .sandbox.ts files within your source directory, and the Playground for Angular has a CLI that will run, that will watch for those files and then create a single file that has all of your sandboxes in it and surface that to its Playground app, sort of thing. So I've got this example app from the Angular CLI, and I'm just going to start with kind of like a time to component concept. So we have this, I have this directory in here called my sandbox. It's going to be small on the side. It's just a directory I've created that I've added to my git ignore, and I'm going to just create a file on the fly here that's a .sandbox.ts extension. And I'm just going to start making a component in this file. So I don't even have a component file yet. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to make a new component. And we will call this thing EX.
You're being blocked on the screen. Can you just add some blank lines to the top?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm not going to export this thing. I'm just making this thing in line here. I'm going to. Okay, so I've got my component in here I just created. Now I'm going to sandbox it. So the Playground has an API. It has a function called sandbox of, and I'm actually going to, in each of my sandbox files, I'm going to export that as default. So I'm going to export. I can type here. So I'm making a sandbox of, I'm going to import this statement here. Sandbox of this component, so welcome component. I'm going to give it the type of that component. And then I'm going to start adding, it has this Fluent interface. I'm going to start adding scenarios, right? So I'm going to sandbox this component, then I'm going to add our first scenario that I want to run this thing in. I'm going to do first scenario. And this thing takes a string, which is going to be the name that helps us find this. And then it takes a configuration object, and the only parameter that's required is template. So what we're doing here is we're essentially creating a host component for this component that we're going to sandbox, right? So the Playground's going to run this thing as a host component, and so in here I'm just going to create an element for our EX welcome. Okay. And I just got to fire this thing up. And so this is our UI. One of the things we want to accomplish with this tool is that it's really used for working an individual component that you know you're working on. So it's not like a discovery app. It's a I know I'm building this component. That's the specific one I'm going to work on. So I want to get right to that thing and see it all by itself, right? So we have this real minimal UI here, and we are going to pull this thing up, and we got a little drop-down filter box. I don't know if you can see that at the top. Look over here. And I called it welcome component, so I'm just going to search for welcome. And we'll pull this thing up, and of course it's like super small font, but let's see. Pull this thing up. And so we've got our component running, you know, outside of our app with nothing else around it, right? So now we have this thing in total isolation. And so a lot of our workflow that we start with is okay, we're ready to build our component. We'll sometimes just start right in here with our example file and write a component right in there. We may not know where we want to put that component file yet or where it's going to go. We can just get up and going and start working on this thing right away. Now this works for directives and pipes as well. Again, because we really just have this host component that we're putting in. So it's just like this parent component that we're able to put whatever we want in our template to start serving these things up. So I could come in here and I could rip all this out. I could do a directive. Oops. And I could do something like a highlight directive. Let's say EX highlight. And then I could just come in here, change this thing to a div. Oops, ooh, getting crazy. Right, and then blown this thing up, so I'm gonna see this. I've changed the name, right? I've got highlight directive now, so I'm highlight directive. I'm picking my first scenario. Oh, and I haven't had any styles, so I've got the highlight me here, right? The directive there, but I got to add some styles here to actually highlight it. So I'll do a host binding real quick. And do style dot background color. That would be handy, right? Okay. And load. Did I do that right? Let's reload. There we go. Okay. So you can also do pipes as well. I'm going to skip the pipe, but it's the same sort of concept, right? Components, directives, pipes, that sort of thing. You can sandbox, put all these things in the playground. So that's kind of a component right there on the fly. I'm going to go ahead and just wipe this out, and we'll dive into doing it for an existing component, right? And kind of how we go about doing that. Okay, so we'll try and use the CLI here. We'll go CD, example app. Okay, so we're going to use the ng generate command here to generate a new component here. Do shared / address. We'll make an address component. Inline template, inline styles, no spec. I'm not going to test right now. Make this thing flat, so no folder for it. Okay, so now I'm going to go to this thing. We're going to go address. Okay, so I want to show here that I'm going to create this address component, and we're going to show kind of using some inputs and stuff on this host component where we can pass it context to kind of set up these different scenarios. So I'll wipe this template out. We'll add, like, let's say div times 5. Ooh. That's not fun. Should have had some snippets here. Okay. So I add some address dot. Okay, so we're like attention to, it's like a shipping address, billing address, that sort of thing. Street, city, oops, state zip, zip, okay. And then we'll come in here and we'll add a property for, add an input for address. All right. And we'll bring this thing in. Okay, so we've got this guy here. Let's go in here and I'm going to create a sandbox file for this thing. So I got my address component. I'm gonna actually add a file. We're gonna do address.component.sandbox.ts again. Playground's gonna find any .sandbox.ts extensions and provide them into that UI for us. So I'm going to do export default sandbox of. We're going to sandbox our new address component, right? And we're going to add a scenario. Default, give it our object with our template. And it is EX address, I believe. Okay. So we've got a component here, we've got a sandbox, and we should see an error. I think when we pull this thing up, so we'll go to this, we'll go, man, that is giant address. Okay, and let's see what we got in the dev tools. We got an error here. We got an error, and we got an error because we have created our component, we created our input, right? But we're using that address.attention to, that sort of thing in our component. Ahead of time, we haven't provided that in an input, right? So we got a problem with there. So now we can go and easily kind of identify that right away. And we know, okay, we don't have that because we're going in here. So we can go back to our component and we can go, oh, well, let's just maybe actually let's wrap this thing in an address element. And then throw an ngIf up here. Oops. Now we should be able to slide back over here, have this thing reload, and now we don't have any error, right? Because now we've handled that scenario. So now let's give it. So we got this scenario back here in our sandbox. Let's just rename this to no address. So now we know we've got that covered, right? And we can keep this around for the future. If I could type, there we go. So now let's add another scenario. So we got this fluent interface off of this add. So each of these adds return this object that we can now call add again off of it. So let's add another scenario, and let's add one with simple address. Okay, we're going to do this template. And we're going to do our EX address. Okay, but now we want to give it an address. So again, this is a host component here, and so we've got several things off of this object that we can hand to these scenarios. So let's go in here. We'll do the little control. So we've got context, description, providers, and styles. So we can do context here, and essentially what we're doing is we're going to add to the context of this host component. So properties, methods, that sort of thing on this host component, like as if it's a class, we can add things to it right within this scenario, right? So I'm gonna do context, I'm gonna add, let's see, I'm gonna add an object, I'm gonna add address, and I'm gonna set this thing up with, we'll do attention to, we can basically build our model that we need here, right? Street. city, state, and zip. And at this point, this context is going to put that address as a property onto our host component. So I can just go in here and again, just think of this as our parent component. So I can come in here and I could bind this address input up to the address that we named it there. Okay. And now we could give this thing like a street and we'll go 123 Ave. And we should be able to slide back over here. And we'll go ahead and so I changed the name on the previous scenario. So it knows like, hey, reloaded, I can't select the same one you had before because I changed it. So that's why we're getting back to this list, right? So we got our no address, right? We got the no address, it still works. We can slide up in here and go to our simple address. And now we've got the address running with that data, right? So we can do other things like fill this out and add another one. And let's say we want to handle scenarios where we've got an attention to, right? Because attention to on an address can be empty at sometimes and then there at other times, right? So we go billing department. And now we have this ability to kind of flip through these different scenarios, right? And as we go and we build this thing out, we're going, okay, well, maybe when we have an attention to, we want to display that with some font and some other different layout, that sort of thing. So now we're free to really kind of like sculpt out our scenarios that we want this component to be in without having to deal with that within the live running of our app. And so I named it the same, didn't change it, but there we go. So one of the things that this solves is like, if you think about it, you have this application, like we have this customer management system, right? And we want to work somebody's tasked with working a shipment line item component, and they're going to go and they're going to build this thing, right? Well, in order for them to see it in the browser, typically you're going to have to launch the app. You're going to have to find a customer that has orders, that has shipments, that has a line item that matches what you're trying to work on, right? Just to get to it and navigate to it to see it running in the browser. And then you're also going to need to say, well, look, if I support a line item with 1,000 units versus 10 units, does that display correctly? Well, how do I get my application in that state to see that scenario, right? And I would have to either fill my seed data for my application with that or have some other way to do it, or what we a lot of times do is just hard code that into our component. We go into that parent component, hard code this test, do it, make sure we remove that before we make our commits. And so this is solving all of that, right? This gives us this platform, this place to do this without having to deal with all that sort of stuff. Okay, so again, there's a couple other properties on here that you can set. We have a styles property. So let's see if I can bring this back up here. So we have providers and styles. And so styles would be any styles that you want to put on there. These are real similar to our component metadata that we have, right? You can kind of see the pattern going on here. So styles would be an array of strings of styles that you want to put on the host component, not on your actual component. So now you can kind of simulate when I run this component in this other parent, if I need to put things on there that I know I'm going to have in my application, I can put those things here and now see that component in that case. Providers, same sort of deal. We've got a providers that's basically the providers for that host component. So you can do things like if I have a component here, and I'll jump over here to this one. So I've got this notice component, right? And this notice component takes in this counter service and it works with that to do this increment. Well, I can go into the sandbox file, and in here I have a mock counter service, right? And I can go into the add, and on this one right here, line 27, I'm using the providers property to provide my mock counter service in replace of the counter service, and now I can mock out the things that my component uses from that host component down. So HTTP calls, anything that you have with your components is real similar to testing, right? You can mock these things out and now run that component in isolation with the replacement of those things. So let's see. Now, along with the options that we have for these different scenarios. And you can make as many of these scenarios as you want. You just keep adding, and they'll just show up in the menu, right? We can come over here, and I should be able to pull that one up. That was a notice component. So I can see that I've got, all these cases in here, and I can just cycle through them and see them at any given time, sort of thing. Now, the sandbox of function also has this additional data that we can send it, an object as well. We can see that example here. We have an imports property, a declare component property. Let me just navigate right to this thing here. And we can look at kind of the signature for this. So here's that scenario config that we have of these options that we can send in at the scenario level or at the .add level. And in the sandbox of level, we have this config that allows us, better bring this down here a little bit. Oops. Well, I guess I'll do that. That we can prepend text. The prepend text option is that the component name is going to show up in that drop-down list that we have, the component that we're working on. So the prepend text gives you a way to put some additional text in front of that. So if you want to organize some things, maybe you have the same component name and address component in multiple features in your app, and they'll show up as address component. You can put like feature 1 as the prepend text. Now you can have feature 1 address component, feature 2 address component, that sort of thing. The imports, so this signature is really similar to ng modules. So the imports, you can import other modules. So if you have a component that is working with forms using the form module, you could bring in this, you could do the imports and import the form module for your sandbox for that particular component. Declarations, bring in any other components, directives, that sort of thing that your component relies on. Provider, same sort of thing for your services and that sort of thing. Because when you run these things in the playground, you're running them without any of your rest of your application running. So if you have a component that is relying on a service that's coming from some other module and it's working, as soon as you put it in the playground, you're going to see that it doesn't work. It's requiring that. Same deal with kind of unit testing. You run into these same sort of things. And where that becomes pretty cool is that now you can really start getting some insight on your components and where you've kind of coupled things with them, right? And sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you're going to need to have them rely on that. So that's fine. But it really starts exposing, okay, am I relying on some magic that this component's running in this app, in this module that has 3 other modules up in my app that it's getting something from? And if I was to put it somewhere where those modules didn't exist, is this thing going to fall apart on me? And this will expose it right away if that's going to happen. So it's kind of cool in that scenario. So yeah, then the final thing I want to talk about on this is we created this tool because we knew that for our workflow, we want to say, we know exact component, directive, or pipe that we're working on. So we just want the UI as minimal as possible, the development experience to be like, I want to get right to working on that component. I don't want to have a UI that launches, when it reloads, I have to navigate all this stuff. I want to just be working on that one component because I know exactly what I'm working on, right? But of course, there's this opportunity to surface your components that you sandbox in some sort of way that you could say, oh, I would love to see an inventory of all the things that I have, or I'd like to write some documentation around that and surface these things for other people that aren't using the playground right now to develop, but now we have this way to expose these components without running them right in our app. So we added a embed mode so that we could essentially go to the URL and provide, so we got this deep linking. So all of our things as you navigate to each one is going to have a full URL for it, super small up there, but basically allows you to then, copy and paste that and use that to direct link into something if you're running the playground on its own server. We can also provide a parameter for @embed equals 1 or true or whatever. And what that's going to do is that's going to run the playground without the command bar and all that overhead sort of thing. And so what we use this for is we have like a style guide application that's running some other documentation like a wiki sort of site. And we will write sandboxes and scenarios around our components with some markup in that host component that kind of describes what this component's used for, or some code samples of how to use it if you want to copy paste this code. And then we use this embed mode so that we can bring it in via iframes to our documentation site. So now we can use it not only for development, but we can also use it for documentation and that sort of thing. So kind of have the multi-purpose there. Yeah, so what's next? Ooh, I'm super zoomed in. Let me super zoom out here. So we got, again, this is open source, so it's up there. You can pull it down, you can use it, you can start playing with it. We're going to do some more cleanup on the source code. We've got a few things that we want to do in terms of optimization and stuff for the actual app that runs, the Playground app with that command bar and everything. We want to add some more to these example apps. We kind of want to showcase a little more of that depth problem that we talk about where, you have 7 or 8 components deep on the tree, and that's the one you want to work on, and how easy that is when you do it in the Playground versus running that in that app. And then to add some more docs to our doc site, we've got this doc site up there that kind of explains how to get going and sort of like that. So we want to add more examples of how to do those sort of things. And again, it's open source, so if anybody wants to contribute, feel free to. We have our help site and our docs at angularplayground.it, and then it's on GitHub at socreate/angular-playground. And that's all I got. Thanks.
Now we're going to do some Q&A, so if we can get Sebastian to come back up here. And then if you want to raise your hand, and I will run around with the mic. Questions? Comments, thoughts, feelings, inspiration.
More robots, right?
What's the biggest robot you've ever controlled?
I think the biggest one I have is about this big, and it's like you can walk and stuff, but it's a bit clumsy and slow, and I was worried that I'll get arrested at the airport, so I left. So, while these small guys can sneak in everywhere.
Sebastian, this is for you. Question, do you guys support then like in Android, all of like intents and all of that framework too, or just the UI stuff? Well, within Android, you have intent services that you can, like alerts and things like that and everything in the background. Yeah. Are you supporting that in addition to the UI components?
Actually, I'm not sure. I haven't heard of intent. So I can't say for sure.
So that's actually a really interesting thing that you haven't heard of intent. So for those of you that have done native Android development, intents are how you move between activities. So you say, so you go from one screen to another saying, hey, I have this intent. I want to launch this other activity. You can pass a parcel of data. It's kind of cool that you've built Android applications that control robots without knowing what intents are. So that actually says something very powerful on native.
Yeah, I'm not a native Android developer. That's a thing.
So you don't need to, but I'm sure like if I wanted to access the contact picker, right?
Yeah, so you should. So by default, what we do is actually we run pretty much everything in the UI thread, and then we have additional processes that if you want to run something in the background thread stuff, then you have to actually set it all up.
So you guys manage that process?
Yeah.
Versus Android.
We manage it so that you can actually trigger an Android side and then on iOS as well. So we can actually, like on iOS, you can make absolutely any function call and add at the end .async, and this will automatically spawn like a background thread. For Android, we do it slightly differently. Okay. Yeah.
I have a question
Sure.
related to NativeScript. How mature NativeScript is ready for production related to business application, like database call, for example?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we launched NativeScript 1.0 in May 2015, and that was production ready. In May 2016, we added Angular, which was production ready. And then in a few weeks' time, we added 3.0, which is adding a lot of new features. But yeah, it's totally production ready. You can do a lot of things with it. There's hundreds of plugins as well that are built by community, etc. So I wouldn't hesitate to use it, if I'm honest.
Does NativeScript support SAS and common JavaScript library that's used in the web, like RxJS or jQuery? Or
yeah. So
whatever.
Yeah, you can use SAS. That's no problem. Like actually, the code sharing project I was showing you, like giving you a link to, that's using SAS. You can use absolutely anything that's JavaScript, for as long as it doesn't depend on DOM, right? There is no DOM, there is no web view. So I don't know, if you try to use jQuery, it's gonna fail, right? But if you wanna use Moment.js, that's gonna work fine. RxJS, not a problem. It's actually, RxJS is part of Angular, so obviously you should be able to use. So for as long as it doesn't use DOM or any browser dependencies, you'll be perfectly fine. And the same thing applies for native Android and iOS libraries. So if you have, let's say, I don't know, like a credit card reader that you can attach to your phone that has an Android library for it to control, you can just import it and start calling from JavaScript. And same thing for iOS. No else? There's two more.
Justin, this is for you. For the playground thing, if I have a component which, let's say I have a component where I click on a button and it's supposed to get something back from a service. I saw that you have providers, but it was use class mock service. Does it always need to be mocked, or can I actually hit an existing service with that framework as well?
Yeah, you can use existing service. So in that component, at the top in the sandbox for the imports, I was importing a shared module, and that shared module is where that counter service lived. And so all of the scenarios are going to get that counter service and be wired up, so that'll be all ready to go with that. And then on one of the scenarios, I overrode that provider with the mock. So yeah, you can bring those in and use them, use your existing services, or you could use mocks, whatever you need to do.
Just a comment on that thing. I think that's a fantastic thing. I've been building this app where there's a certain component that I need to get to, but to get to that place, I have to click 4 or 5 things to get to that. And it's a little painful every time you change to log in and do all of those things. So I'm actually pretty happy with this thing, and that's looking forward to using this.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly why we built it. You have all these scenarios, log in, all these steps that you have to do to get there, right? And then you have, as you make changes, it's refreshing the browser. So now you got to deal with all that again, and yeah.
I'm new to NativeScript, so is inspect element a thing in NativeScript? No.
So you mean like for debugging?
Yes.
Yeah, you could do that. So I could literally, like, instead of TNS run, if I wrote TNS debug iOS Android, for iOS, I'll get the Safari tools popping up, and then I can inspect, put breakpoints, or even issue commands directly from the console. And then for Android, we would basically allow you to use the Chrome extension tools for debugging, and then you can do exactly the same. And you can then debug both the emulators on your phone, on your laptop, and real devices as well, which is pretty amazing.
Question for Mr. Schwarzenberger.
Yes, Hans.
Is the playground still like under like new features, or are they being added? Is it still being developed? And do you take feature requests?
Yes and yes. At the heart of it, what we want to try and do is, again, we want to keep it this awesome dev tool, right? And lightweight and fast. So you get right to your component, and that's what you're looking at. So that's kind of our only like mission statement around like how we're picking features and stuff that come in. Other than that, like if we can meet that, then yeah, we definitely are trying to figure out ways to make it better. I mean, we use it internally, and we've used it pretty heavily for stuff, but we want to know how other people use it and what's effective and what they need, and that sort of thing. And so absolutely looking for people to give us feedback, to use it. Yeah. Do you have something that you want to? Yeah. All right.
All right, we'll do one more question, and then you guys, I think the speakers will be around after if you guys want to ask direct questions.
Yeah, just thanks for showing. Call out your favorite dev resources or dev tool besides what you're showing.
For just working on Angular stuff?
Yeah, just for Angular.
That's a good question. Maybe I'll turn it to just in terms of IDEs, IDEs and development tools. I mean, I know a lot of people love VS Code. I love VS Code too, but the productivity in WebStorm is pretty amazing. You get up in a template and have, we get that now with Angular language services and VS Code. We get a little bit more, but I've been going back and forth between that and WebStorm, and I kind of have settled probably more on WebStorm as I feel way more productive with that in terms of speed and refactorability and that sort of thing. Yeah, we're waiting. on a few things like with the CLI as we get generators and support for doing custom generator stuff on that. That's going to be really cool. You know, our productivity is around, we create a bunch of components and we're working those sort of things. So we're looking for things like scaffolding and templating and stuff like that. But yeah. Yeah, we use NGRX. So the tools around that. You know, we want to get into Augury and check that out too. I don't know if you've heard of Augury. We haven't played much with that yet. We actually, we were talking about that at Contributor Days this past Saturday. Angular Contributor Days, we're talking about Augury and adoption, how people can find out about it. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a Chrome dev extension that can help you get insight on the state of your data and stuff like that for your Angular application that's running. And I kind of joked, like, I think it was previously called Batarang. And I had Batarang installed on my browser, never really used it. Remove that, put Augury on there. It's still installed in there, but I haven't really used it. So I just need to dive into more. But supposedly that's supposed to be really good for kind of looking at your state and kind of your running application, that sort of thing.
All right, awesome. Well, the speakers will be here to answer any other questions you guys have. Let's give them another round of applause, everyone. All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for coming. Just a notice about the meetup next month. So the May meetup will not be the second Wednesday like it normally is. It will actually be the third Tuesday. So if you're looking at the next meetup, it will be May the 16th. So Tuesday, May the 16th. The reason we're doing the rescheduling is because of Google I/O, which you guys may have heard of, which is a big, exciting conference that we're hosting over at Shoreline Amphitheater. And there's a few Angular talks in there, so stay tuned to that. And then it'll be a social meetup, so meeting people, chatting, eating food together with some of the Angular team and the other members of the community. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and have a wonderful night.